Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Opposite Tracks. Joining me today is Mohammed Al Hakim with our inaugural episode, No One Leaves Paradise. Mo, how you feeling today?
I'm good, buddy. How are you?
I'm well. This is a long time coming. Are you ready for this?
I'm absolutely ready. Let's energize and get this stuff going.
Thank you so much for joining me today. Is Mohammed Al Hakim, a good friend and Star Trek analyst. Mo, how are you doing today?
I'm good, man. My friend, it has been a long time coming. How's
It's been
everything
a
on
long.
how's everything on your side of the world?
It's good. It's good. I'm very happy with all the cool stuff that's happening in the Star Trek world, and we are really happy to be able to have this format, this cool new show. Really happy and excited to have this conversation with you because it's something we've been arguing, I think, for years. Where are the ethical and moral conundrums within Star Trek, and where do we fall on that spectrum? What is a legal and ethical good inside of Star Trek, and how do we see the either insidious nature or benevolent nature of the Federation? Mo, I have an inkling as to where you sit in the spectrum of
Sure.
things. So
Yeah.
why don't you start us off by telling us what you think of the Federation?
Oh, it's a big question to start off with. Listen, my view of the Federation is, at worst neutral and at best enlightening in terms of at least picking apart the earlier episodes and the earlier shows like the original Star Trek and the Next Generation, and having come to it later than yourself and having been introduced to Star Trek a little bit later when I was early as a graduate student, um, you know, I approached the issues, I guess, from a completely different lens that has always, I think, colored our conversations. And so, but I think it's safe to say that we're almost always on the opposite end of
Agreed.
the track. Yeah,
No, I
uh,
agree.
right. And which has always baffled me, just because, I guess to explain a little bit of this show concept, since it's an inaugural episode, um, it's not that like you and I had a completely different upbringing, or we grew
No,
up in different parts of the world, different sides of it, and came to have these. It's just two people who have very similar upbringing, similar environment, similar schooling, similar parents, cultural backgrounds. But then one of us is just so wrong, and the other is so right. Right? That's baffling.
it is
It's
baffling.
baffling. It's
Mm, mm,
baffling.
mm.
How could someone get it so wrong?
So wrong.
But I get it. If you were raised in a culture where you started with admiration and then came to critical thinking about it, I think your critical thinking is a little bit clouded at that point.
That's so
And
interesting.
my advantage is just coincidental. You know,
Mm,
I happen
mm.
to stumble upon something. I'm like, whoa, what's going on? While you're somewhat
Yes,
praising it at
of
times.
course.
You know,
So as children, of course, I watched TNG. I mean, I watched them live. I watched them with my geeky friends, and my friend Mo here would make fun of us. Of course, there are many things to make fun of us for.
sure.
This was one particular facet in the cornucopia of things that we left ourselves open for interpretation. And so within that, eventually, I got Mo to start to watch the show. Mo, where did you start in your Star Trek journey?
I started, if I have a kind of a distinct memory, it would be as a graduate student. I was working in my master's in philosophy, and this is back in the mid 2000s, like 2005, 2006. And there was this episode. I got into this mode of watching an episode, and then as kind of a break from my writing of my thesis, and I stumbled upon this episode, which kind of fit, at least it invoked themes that were very familiar to me because I've been working on them in political, legal, kind of ethical, philosophical lens. This was episode on Star Trek Next Generation. I don't know my episode numbers
That's
or
okay.
seasons,
You
although I'm
don't need
sure.
to.
Well, neither do you, but yet here we are.
I
You know,
try, yes.
uh, and it was an episode where this planet is about to have like a supernova moment, and this scientist who's working on, he's like the special scientist working on this resolution, is approaching the age of 60, and there's this
Oh,
like long-standing ritual of committing suicide at the age of 60 for
yeah.
because you don't want to become a burden on your children.
David
And
Ogden Stier is the name of the actor.
see,
He was
here
on
we go.
MASH. Yeah,
Right?
continue.
Yeah, yeah. Here we go. And I know that you don't have anything in front of you that's giving you this information. It's coming
No, no,
clearly from your
fair.
story, from all those years of being indoctrinated. um, and that episode really sparked a lot of interest in me because I was working on cultural issues and long-standing cultural issues and weren't necessarily grounded in
It was a
rationality.
brilliant episode. Brilliant.
And yeah, and and that's why actually I think even like the first time really thought more critically about what the prime directive was. So language like that started to enter my lexicon. And of course it doesn't take long to find the philosophical roots that are grounded, sorry, in Star Trek and informing some of its uh, setup. So that was, of course, you and I had over the years talked about Star Trek here and there. We had
Yes.
all the jokes about the one film, I think Star Trek 4, with Scotty not knowing how to use it.
Hello.
Right. So it
Completely.
goes back, but that was my first, I think, I would say my critical entry into
Yeah.
watching the show.
That's cool. And let's just remember the episode a little bit about this guy. He falls in love with the Waxana Troy, and in his culture, they have to die at the age of 60.
Right.
He's one scientist on the planet who has the ability to save the planet.
Right.
Basically, and no one else within the time frame given of the supernova could do it. And so, for his own personal beliefs, for his own spiritual beliefs, he wants to allow himself to die, and he just wants to say, well, if it's not meant to be, it's not meant to be. Loxana finds him to be an amazing man. She's begging and pleading for him to continue his life for his people, for her, for life, trying to make the argument that life is better. But he has these deep religious, spiritual ties to the planet, and even the people on the planet who realize that he is about to die as well are okay with it.
Right.
In the end, he breaks it. Yeah.
I think his own daughter visits him on the ship, and she's disappointed in him.
Yeah.
Lets him know that he's chosen his own kind of personal beliefs over the long-standing practices. And I think that was a great episode, only in part because the arguments for why you should kill yourself at the age of 60 were fallacious, and they were difficult to really give a full endorsement for. That is to say, you could see counter arguments to why one shouldn't necessarily end their life at the age of 60, as they could be in very good health and not become a burden. But at the same time, it wasn't what gave oomph to that belief wasn't the fact that it was grounded in something reasonable or could be rationally argued. Right? Of course, a rational argument can be made either way, but it was just in this long-standing practice that to a group was central to their identity, even if it meant certain and that to me has always been an issue of interest ever since I started my journey into taking philosophy more seriously and studying these things. But to me it was interesting because you're not going to at the end of the day make a rational argument to why a certain set of beliefs or practices should be endorsed or not endorsed, but it requires something more than that. And that's what really hooked me at the beginning was that episode. And then of course, like any person who starts to watch something, I kind of started to expand from there, and find other episodes and kind of look for themes. And before long, I could start to see some of the troubling signs in the Federation and the way that they conduct themselves and some of the values that they masquerade in their hegemonic type of approach to the universe. And of course, you put it behind a likable face like Picard or like Kirk or Janeway or whoever, right? And all of a sudden, it's got this kind of like human, sympathetic, empathetic tone to it. But it's troubling. It's troubling because 30 years of being exposed to that, and here you are with your headphones on, trying to unpack all this Star Trek that you've observed and hopefully seeing it now from a new lens. That's what Opposite Track is all about. It's not about staying on the opposite track. It's about getting you to come over and see things from this side.
That side. Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about this. Yeah.
I don't want to put it even in sides, right? Because I don't want to assume there's only two sides. Although there's this opposite track, but
fair. It's not dichotomous. It's a spectrum.
Right. Absolutely.
but you definitely fall on the side that, okay, let me not characterize your point of view. Let me characterize mine. I characterize that there is a benevolent nature to the galactic organization known as the Federation. Without it, there would be a lot more suffering in the universe, and that it's a historic joining of a peoples in which their resources are divided as to their needs. Their health is much better. Their life expectancies are longer. They have one unified military, so they're not like able to sort of have the same uh, types of wars and problems and conflicts. You have a unified raison d'etre, which is to seek out new worlds, seek out life, seek out new civilizations. And so, to that effort as a galactic civilization, you share knowledge and understanding with each other in a council with uh, a pseudo military, as the Starfleet is. The actual militaries, like the Mako and the Enterprise and stuff like that, they do have their own like native Earth militaries, but they're different than their space forces, which has been subsumed by Starfleet and has its headquarters in San Francisco. Their technology grows by leaps and bounds because they can approach things in a galactic way rather than just a planetary way. They're not limited by the nature of the distances that they have to each other. Those are the points that I would make as to the positive good that the Federation brings to the table. Mo, your response?
I don't want to come out of saying that nothing good comes out of the Federation, right? Because that would be mischaracterization of my point. But this notion of benevolence, I mean, so my initial reaction is to just back up, right? Because I haven't adopted the Star Trek framework in terms of what they consider to be good, and your whole argument at the beginning is really just, if I could just generalize, this one big utilitarian argument, right?
Yes,
that
yes.
Under this system, as opposed to some other system, right?
Correct.
Things are better. They're better because there's fewer wars, less better medication, more intergalactic exchange of ideas, knowledge, right? And so you've got this like really fundamental conception of what would be a better world, right? So state of the world, scenario 1 versus scenario 2, where scenario 1 there's less suffering, more engagement, more cooperation. Worf is not liking this.
Worf
seems to have taken issue with a lot of this kindness, and you value that world, that state of affairs over another set of affairs, and that's because you're kind of inherited this deeply utilitarian, almost English way of thinking, if I can use a bit of a Nietzschean kind of.
Fine, it's true. It's all right.
Right, and so you want to spread that conception of justice, right? The distribution of goods, all that is your way of saying this will make things better. So if everyone could live under this kind of framework,
I'm not proselytizing. I'm not proselytizing.
But it's this universalization of your conception to a whole galaxy, right? Not just to our world or to our planet. And you are kind of in this framework of saying, look, but these are the principles that we should be promoting. And when we engage with others, these are the kind of principles and terms and conditions that are the best, the prime directive, all that kind of stuff. And it's already a view that's unable to escape itself and stop. And that's because I never entered the Federation. I guess I already had this philosophical lens of seeing these kind of big schools of thought and the way they inform our thinking and understanding, that you start. I entered it as seeing it as a construction, right? Even what we understand to be. So, for example, in my view, when Star Trek, if the encyclopedia is finally able to collect information on the Vulcan way of life, right?
Okay.
That way of life is still interpreted through a human lens, and so
it's definitely got an anthropocentric. Yes, it's a human lens.
Right, and so so our best understanding even of alien life, it's still constructed through a human lens that tries to impose concepts that it thinks are grounded in something called reality. And so Star Trek is this kind of mission to expand the Federation, and they will go to war with others who, don't share this mandate, and they don't have to be the aggressors, but certainly the mandate itself could be the point of tension. And by doing so, there's this kind of a colonial, hegemonic air to the Federation. And
Interesting.
right? And I'm not saying that everyone within the Federation is therefore a bad person, right?
Sure.
But sometimes, as I pointed out to you, things are, said by certain characters and portrayed are problematic, and I think others have picked up on it. I'm not saying anything unique.
No, I hear what you're saying.
But I guess I just always entered the forum in that way. So when you say things like benevolent, and there's this, realm of possibilities where we can do this and do that, I agree with you. And in the world in which everyone was like the Federation, the world will be a better place. Except there are those disgruntled anti-federalists who are always portrayed as outside the norm, and so are at some point casted as. Now, of course, Star Trek in its later shows does a better job of the ambiguity of who's right and who's wrong and who's really making the right call. But it's also, so it's skewed, and you are, to no fault of your own, just had an entry point so early that your admiration, like I said earlier, for it kind of drove your perceptions. That's why you're mostly wrong.
Fair.
And I'm at worst neutral, and at best getting you to the right side rather than
okay
opposite side.
Lovely. I hear what you're saying. I guess I do make a utilitarian argument in that there are, Spock even said, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few.
The classic.
The classic, line. And I could cite, there's xenophobia in Enterprise. In the later seasons, they come back after they've done all this stuff with the Xindi. They come back and they don't even recognize Earth. There are like elements on Earth that are like, we want all aliens off of Earth. They've radicalized in a way, and we're like, we don't even recognize Earth. And those types of xenophobic attitudes were not welcome in the Federation, because the Federation is supposed to be inclusive. And so I definitely advocate for inclusivity, the inclusivity of the Federation, which is infinite forms and infinite diversity and infinite combinations. That anyone and anything with a benign, positive, benevolent sort of ideation should be allowed to become part of the Federation. And even if it's not, it should have the ability to reflect on the Federation and see what we can offer in order to adjust their framework. Once a warp-faring civilization encounters the Federation, we don't co-opt them. We negotiate. We send out peace feelers. We allow them to. We trade with them. We give them economic goods. We try to take care of them.
So generous.
Yes, it's true.
Yeah. Benevolent leaders.
Yes.
Sure.
Exemplars.
For sure. Of course. Holders of justice.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead. Continue.
No, I want to segue eventually to a few specific problems. There's one that you're very familiar with, which we'll get to, but I want to let you respond to what I just said, which is I'm going to get to the Tuvix problem in a second. But before we do that, is there anything else that you would cap on what we've just discussed?
No, I think there's always something to be said. So I guess picking a point and saying let's just come back to it.
Fair.
But there's definitely a lot there to unpack in terms of the world in which you envision is the Federation world, right? And the way in which it conducts itself. And it just it needs patience and time to kind of untangle these things. And I do think the Tuvix episode that we're going to talk mostly about today is a good one, because it shows you that even when the Federation tries, by the end, hopefully we'll be able to show that the Federation tries to play neutral, but it's committed to a particular view. And it's a view that makes it, if I can say another just general point,
please.
And this is just a point of tension that I think exists philosophically for any group. This notion of wanting to be inclusive.
Yes.
Right? By virtue of creating any group, any category, in this case the Federation, it must necessarily have a border in which it excludes something, call it the other or whatever doesn't have the properties of that category.
Non-Federation. Correct.
Non-Federation. Everything outside the class of Federation. So whenever you create a category, there's always this tension in which something can be included, but by necessity, something also must be excluded.
Yes.
So this ideal of consistently inclusive just widens the borders of a potential kind of, federation colonial type of framework in which you're constantly consuming and bringing others by federalizing them, making them part of the federation. I'm not sure what the
Yes,
proper
I like that, federalizing.
And always excluding some other. That becomes a new radical in this, right? And the goal is always proceeding, but perhaps with no end, right? Because there's always going to be, if everything becomes federation, nothing is federated, right? Kind of
That's right.
Right, like the category of friends. If everyone's your friend, no one's your friend. By virtue of having friendship, you now have to exclude someone, right?
Yes.
And hopefully, again, we'll get you out of that type of thing, because the agenda of saying things, well, we're all inclusive, is part and parcel to the agenda that you've inherited from the federation, potentially, that makes you, a
useful idiot.
You come to support the cause, failing to see, right? You're an instrument here, of course, right? Because the scariest.
But I'm not propagandizing. I'm not.
No, but
proselytizing.
Look, the scariest thing about, and others have noted this is not my view, but one that I endorse. But the greatest fear of totalitarianism is not that somebody's going to come and overnight take over the state. It's that the ordinary citizen becomes complicit, right, in the totalitarian state, right? They carry out the orders and they agree with them and they find some kind of measure of acceptability, right? That's what totalitarian. I'm not talking about a dictatorship here. I'm talking about totalitarianism, right?
Sure.
It doesn't function because one person at the top, your stereotypical Hitler, right, is somehow able to actually enforce these things with just brute force. And that's the scary thing. The average person says, "Well, I was just following the law, or I was just following the mandate of the federation," right? And so that's what's become scary, is that people become complicit. I'm not pointing at you here. My thumbs are just
no
talking this way, but you are. I fear for you sometimes. In terms
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah, that's it. Okay, I think we can stop it there.
I like that, Mo. Thank you. I appreciate that you're thinking of me, at least when you're putting me in this category of being brainwashed or co-opted by
just when you come
utilitarian organization.
When you come to inherit the language of your discourse, you start to sometimes fail to see its problematic nature, right? So
fair.
So I just wanted to point out that your all-inclusive club here is not really all-inclusive, and creates a category that excludes others and then devalues.
I would argue that it is evolving and getting better.
Yes,
and moving towards a better version of itself.
Unity. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Agreed.
Oh my god. I'm actually reminded of an episode where Sisko goes back to Earth and he's arguing with his grandfather, Sisko's, and he's like trying to protect them from an incoming infiltration of like the shapeshifters. He's like, the grandfather's like, "You're treading on our freedom." He's like, it's just stay inside. He's like, "No one is gonna tell me to stay inside." He's like, "If I was a really smart shapeshifter, I'd get all his blood and release it on command." He's like, "You don't understand. You're taking away our freedom, our autonomy. You can't do this." And Sisko sees, like, he realizes, like, yeah, like, why are we fear mongering? How can we become like a secure state like this? How can we put Earth on like red alert like this and keep them under like kind of like a security state? So that reminds me of that, where you have to respect the autonomy of the individual, and your argument that once you have bought into this mandate, you're really being subsumed. You're really, just membership in this organization. If I'm correctly sort of making a point of what you're saying, by saying part of this membership is giving up part of your autonomy. A lot of DS9 is like trying to get Bajor into the Federation, or trying to get like others, persuade them to come into the Federation, and that's why Sisko was initially, he's like, "We want you. Your job is to get this planet to figure out some way." And when he argues with Michael Eddington, and Michael Eddington's like, "No one leaves paradise."
Right.
He's like, "That's how insidious." He's like, "At least the Borg, they tell you what they're doing. The Federation doesn't do that." But he's like, you want the Cardassians to join us one day. That's why you're sending them industrial replicators and fabricators. He's like, because you want them to take their place one day in the Federation. He's like, you can't even call them out. So I understand like the insidious nature, and so I'll use that term that no one leaves paradise.
I agree.
Yeah.
I've always thought of Deep Space Nine as being the one that, you know, when I started to watch them more, I started to see that was the one that kind of brought the tensions more to the surface between what the Federation did and thought it needed to do. And you know, I mean, as you go further into it, you start to see that the Federation is no, you know, again, and I'm sure many can push back on this, but you start to see that their ways of doing things are really not that different from, you know, more nefarious groups that are maybe more explicit about their agenda, right?
Yes. Yes.
And, and anyone can get behind the flag of autonomy and liberty and so on and so forth to give justification to their cause. But the Federation's always just rubbed me the wrong way, just because there's this notion in which they hold this Prime Directive as this like high ethical doctrine. The you know, the prescription to which is a way in which we can always distinguish our actions as being in accordance with some capital G good or capital J justice, right? That we are, and it's you know, especially on the next generation, it's always been irritating to see how that just becomes a doctrine that allows them to get away with infringing on the autonomy of others. So, but that's, I think, you know, a good intro into why you and I are just, our intuitions are different when it comes to watching Star Trek, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think our debates are always grounded in, you know, seeing the same episode but just in sometimes really opposite ways, and it sharpens me, right? I mean, there's this philosophical attitude, argument attitude that I read once in a book about it, and I don't know who the Muslim philosopher is, but like some 12th century Muslim who had this perfect attitude. And he said, the difference between me and my opponents is that I'm always right with a chance of being wrong, and my opponent is always wrong with a chance of being right, which kind of keeps that humble line that there's always a chance I'm being wrong. No, I joke around with you there. But yeah, it's that, you know, that classic Arabic attitude of flipping words and playing with them.
Yeah, man, shuffle the boards.
But yeah, so I'm excited to see where these episodes go, where we can focus more on specific episodes and kind of the underlying tones that come out of them. I know you and I have always had some fun online with the with some Twitter accounts that we've kind of used for our own amusement. This Picard sympathizer who tries to I don't even know who this person is. I would never have discovered them without you.
I love them.
But they're always putting like Picard tips, and they're always like,
I love those.
And I always find something problematic about it, you know.
Sure.
But whoever runs that account has, you know, hasn't really responded much.
No, just that one time.
But it's been for our entertainment, which is I'm glad that we have as an outlet. But I'm more glad for this as
thanks, man.
A way for us to explore our opposite tracks, and hopefully by the end. I also think it's interesting that we're currently at more or less almost opposite ends of the world.
Yeah.
We're opposite in our viewpoints when it comes to Star Trek. But yet, like I said, similar upbringing, and you'd almost think we would share more than we disagree on, but that's where we are.
That's okay. I'm gonna wrap it here. If you see what I wrote there, whatever, we'll do another episode where we'll get into the Tuvix problem and discuss some of the things that you've taught and you've argued specifically about that. I really want to thank you for joining me here today and sharing your thoughts and introducing the show and allowing us to set aside the time to let us know exactly how wrong you are on the insidious nature of the Federation. I look forward to future conversations where I can debunk your crazy ideas. And
I feel the same. I feel the same when I to get back to the whole categories, right? I need you, or else how can I ever be right? You know, and so you are the background by which I'm able to, you know, show people the light.
I hear you.
Happens to be coincidentally anti-Federation, but
Right.
Am I anti-federation? No, I'm not. Are my views consequentially anti-federation? Yes, they are.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ray.
No, it's okay. We're gonna. No. I want to give you the last word. I appreciate you saying the things that you've said and for joining us today. Watch us next time. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join our channel, Trekker's Delight. Thanks so much, Mo. I'll see you next time, buddy.
Thank you, and be nice to your Android phones.
I just want to talk to her. No, I just want to talk to her. Like I heard, like what I think Robin said. I think she wanted to pull her hands back.
She wanted to do a bitch.
No, she wanted to.
Bitch.
So if you can't tell, they have thoughts about Discovery.
Look, here's the thing. Cancel culture might get everyone else, but they won't come for me in this subject. If you are our allies, we are not talking to you. We are not talking to you. This does not. Pop. Okay, we're not talking to you. Stop trying to take our shit and make it your goddamn business. It ain't got nothing to do with you. It ain't got nothing to do with you. Did I say that? No. I said Ackless and Cardassian. If you are neither in that category, go to another show.